Thank you very much. It's always a great honor to be at this event, frankly. We're here to celebrate Ukrainian war veterans, and as a member of Parliament for Etobicoke Lakeshore, where we are right now, I'm incredibly proud. I'm incredibly proud to represent a community that I've lived in for 42 years. I'm incredibly proud to be at an event here where I see so many familiar faces and friends. And I'm incredibly proud to be here with my colleague Boris, who sits with me on the government side of the House. But I do want to recognize somebody else here tonight, because people watch Parliament on a regular basis and they see us butting heads and conflicting over a number of issues, but there are some issues that, in my opinion, bring us together, and we put aside our partisanship and we work together because we believe in the same thing. And supporting Ukraine is one of those issues, and that's why I'd like to acknowledge our colleague from the Conservative Party, James Bzan, who's here tonight. I have a greeting from the Prime Minister. You're going to read it later, by the way. I do have a greeting from the Prime Minister. Now, it is an honor to be here this evening to celebrate the contributions of the Canadian Armed Forces to the efforts of Eastern Europe, and especially in Ukraine. I have the good fortune to have many Ukrainian Canadians in my riding, more than Boris, which is something that bothers him to no end, I have to tell you, and a fact I'm regularly reminding him of. But many of our colleagues do as well, and that's something we're very proud of. I was actually born and raised in Thunder Bay before I moved here, and Thunder Bay, as all of you will know, is a community that has a very proud Ukrainian heritage as well. Canada and Ukraine have joined close relations. As you know, we were the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence in 1991. This bilateral relationship is strengthened by warm people-to-people ties rooted in the 1.3 million strong Ukrainian-Canadian community. Without the Ukrainian community, Canada would be a weaker country. Over the past 85 years, Ukrainians have had an incredible impact on Canada. Your contributions have helped make Canada the incredible country that we are today. While we share values and interests that have helped create the social fabric of our country, a belief in freedom of all peoples, and a belief in a free Ukraine are part of our traditions as well. Our goal with our assistance in Ukraine is to improve economic opportunities for Ukrainians and to strengthen democracy. As every person here knows, perhaps better than I do, Canada is working with the government of Ukraine and other development partners to rapidly implement the significant reforms needed for Ukraine to realize its full economic potential and build a sound public institutional legal environment. It's the right thing to do, and we will be there as long as necessary. As of today, June 1st, 2018, the CAF Joint Task Force Ukraine has trained more than 7,680 Ukrainian soldiers. There have been 159 course serials that covered all types of training. The ties are strong between us. Canada is committed to promoting freedom, democracy, and human rights, and so it is our responsibility to work with NATO partners to contribute to improving the situation in Eastern Europe. As for all the veterans who have served and continue to serve our country and promote our values abroad, thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your contribution to making the world a better place. You make Canada proud, you make all of us proud. On behalf of all Canadians, it's such an honor to recognize your sacrifices and commitment. I would like to thank your families too, for by virtue of supporting you, they are supporting UNIFIER and other missions which the CFF is engaged. All of Canada salutes you, and again, thank you for your dedication, hard work, and commitment. Now, I do have a greeting from our Prime Minister, which reads as follows. It is with great pleasure that welcome you to the Canadian Armed Forces Appreciation Night hosted by the Ukrainian War Veterans Association of Canada. Tonight, we honor our members of the CAF and their contributions to the stability in Eastern Europe. Through missions such as Operation UNIFIER, the CAF is helping to ensure that Ukraine remains sovereign, secure, and stable. It is a vital operation to ensure the advancement and protection of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Our women and men of the CAF, as well as their loved ones, have made and continue to make great sacrifice to ensure the protection of Canadians and promote stability around the world. To those members of the forces in attendance tonight, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude for your courageous and dedicated service. Thank you to the Ukrainian War Veterans Association of Canada for making this event possible. Please accept my warmest welcome and best wishes for a successful event, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And I know Boris has some issues he would like to raise and some things he'd like to say, so thanks for joining us, Boris.
Thank you, James. Lieutenant General Vinnick, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, there you are. Good to see you again. Our dear veterans, дорогі наші ветерани, шановна громадо. Just this past Monday, I had the honor of being part of the Canadian delegation in Warsaw, Poland for the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And after 5 days of meetings, discussions, hearings, resolutions, it all culminated with the Secretary General Stoltenberg's address. And I can tell you that all of us in the Canadian delegation were so incredibly proud because the Secretary General made particular note in his closing address of the contribution that our men and women in the armed forces are making to the security of Europe. Notwithstanding that Canada finds herself on the other side of the Atlantic, everyone in NATO today understands and realizes that the greatest security threat to NATO lies in the East, Russia. And we talk about a global hybrid war, but there's also a hard military front that runs from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, and it requires soldiers, the Air Force, and Navy to keep that front strong. And Canada, as the Secretary General noted, has contributed right along that front. From Latvia to air defense in Romania, warships in the Black Sea on a regular basis, but most importantly, there's a hard military front line, but there's an active war in Ukraine. And Secretary General Stoltenberg said something that was particularly important because all the other missions are NATO missions. And some were differentiating and saying, well, the mission in Ukraine is a bilateral. Yes, we have our American and British allies. And he made it clear in addressing the assembly that it should be considered equal to all of those other missions. Because today, Ukraine's soldiers are a shield for NATO and the NATO countries. And it was an important acknowledgement that was made at that assembly. And I can tell you, once again, we were so proud as Canadians, proud of our men and women in uniform, of the contributions that are greater than some of our European NATO allies are making. Today we see a number of our officers, soldiers who've made those contributions. A heartfelt thank you from all of us in the House of Commons for what you've done, especially for what you've done in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the loyal opposition, I invite James Bazan, Shadow Minister for National Defense, to come forward. He will be accompanied by Ted Opitz, former MP for Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Zenon. Holy Fathers, Your Excellencies, General Winnick, Colonels, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be able to come here today and bring greetings on behalf of my colleagues in the Conservative Caucus and our leader, Andrew Scheer, and pay tribute to the brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces and to our veterans who fought in Ukraine, who have fought for Canada, and are making a difference. You know, as the Shadow Minister of Defense, and formerly the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense, and also Vice Chair of our Standing Committee on National Defense, I've had the opportunity to visit Colonel Reeves and this rotation of soldiers that were out there working alongside our Ukrainian family in Yavoriv. As a Canadian, as someone who's proud of my Ukrainian heritage, and I was telling General Winnick currently, you know, a couple of good old prairie Ukrainian boys that we are, part of that first wave of migration. The stock that built the West. Now, I can tell you that I was so proud to see Canadian soldiers working alongside Ukrainian soldiers, making them better, but also learning from their experiences of what they're dealing with in this crazy war that Putin is raging in Donbass. Putin, his proxies, his own soldiers and equipment on Ukrainian territory today. And Donbass, and let's never forget about Crimea. That Crimea will always be Ukraine. As both James and Boris have already said, we have been able to cross party lines and have a unified front with Operation Unifier. Being able to work together to find the proper solutions. That's why I'm proud that we still have Operation Unifier. It was renewed, started under the previous Conservative government, carried forward by the Liberal government. We have a free trade agreement today, which will hopefully really result in improving the lives of the people of Ukraine. We're there working alongside them in reformation, anti-corruption, of making sure that they have civilian oversight of their armed forces. I was proud to sponsor in the House of Commons this year the Sergei Magnitsky law, so that we can hold those Russian kleptocrats, those that are making those human rights abuses in Ukraine, in Russia, and around the world, we can hold them to account and make sure that they can't use Canada as a safe haven to hide their wealth that they've garnered through illicit means, or hide their families after they've gone awry with the Kremlin. And I was proud that we were able to get unanimous support after a lot of hard work in the Senate and the House of Commons and working across party lines to come to a unanimous decision to support this legislation. I'm also proud that at the National Defense Committee, we were able to pull together a great list of recommendations. Some of those we've already seen acted upon, like adding Ukraine to the automatic firearms country control list so that we can ship Canadian-made weapons to assist the Ukrainian military in their war against Russia. Just earlier this week, I was proud to announce on behalf of Andrew Scheer that a conservative government in the future, would take weapons that are currently sitting in storage, that were destined for the Kurdish Peshmerga, and we would give them to Ukraine. Lethal defensive weapons, sniper rifles, pistols, grenade launchers, mortar systems, and anti-tank missiles. Instead of leaving them to sit and collect dust because of the situation in Iraq, let's make use of them and give them to the people that can make a difference. You know, Ted and I both have the honor, along with Chrystia Freeland and Andrew Scheer, of being banned from Russia. And that comes about because we are taking a principled stand against Putin's exercise of trying to rewrite international law, of ignoring all the treaties that he's ever signed, including the UN Charter, the Budapest Memorandum, the Geneva Convention, and others. As Canadians, it is inherent upon us to stand up for Ukraine as they deal with not just aggression, but all-out war. As my colleague said, there is a front line. And soldiers and civilians in Ukraine today are fighting that fight. And because of the commitment, the bravery, and the skill of the Canadian Armed Forces, we're making a difference. I want to congratulate General Winnick, and also on your upcoming promotion as Vice Chief of Defense Staff. Congratulations, sir. But I want to congratulate Paul and Chris for the recognition that you're getting today. And those recognitions come because of the difference that you have made and the way that you have represented Canada in Ukraine. Дякую. Congratulations.
Thank you. I knew General Winnick, and he was just a humble young colonel at the Canadian Forces College. So it's great to be here tonight. And Dan Stepanyuk is with us tonight too. Stepanyuk, who I served with in Bosnia and who's had many, many missions since, as you've seen. So you're in good company because you've got a lot of great Canadians of Ukrainian background here tonight supporting you. You know, just to put something in context with the Ukrainian military, our military is there training them in tremendous skills, NATO standards, fighting skills, organization, all kinds of things that are very important and very vital. But one thing you cannot teach the Ukrainian soldier, male and female, is courage. They are absolutely courageous in standing up to Vladimir Putin, his proxies, and others that are tying up the Donbass and those that have annexed Crimea. And this is something that's very, very important because during the time of the Maidan, during the time of these invasions, yes, the Ukrainian military had thousands of people in it, but they really only had 5,000 effective troops. And now they're at about a quarter, am I right? About 250,000 effective soldiers. What determination, ladies and gentlemen. What courage, what bravery. What stalwart stoicism to stand up to Vladimir Putin and his aggression. Ukraine is doing an immense favor to the West by tying up Vladimir Putin in the East. And this is something that cannot be underestimated. We're very, very proud. I remember when we sent the first 30,000 sets of uniforms, our old olive drab, and the boots and our Gore-Tex jackets, which were all olive drab, because why? When they began this, these guys were fighting the Russians in running shoes and tracksuits. Running shoes and tracksuits. You know, that took an amazing amount, and James is the one that actually ended up delivering it to Ukraine personally. So it was a very important thing to be able to start that, but I am very, very proud to have had a role with James and with others in making sure that they at least had some foundations to be able to build upon. They have. The Ukrainian nation has seized upon that, and they are moving forward. They will be one day great NATO allies of ours. They are moving in a Eurocentric, Euro-Atlantic model. There's a lot that, sure, the Ukrainian government has a lot to do yet. There are a lot of issues. There's still a lot of problems. But a lot of progress has been made. And this is something that we should hang on to, look forward to, and encourage Ukraine, its government, and its soldiers to continue to move forward, because Ukraine deserves to be one of the great European nations, and I am confident, ladies and gentlemen, that it shall be with your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point in time, I'd like to recognize a number of dignitaries who have joined us this evening. First of all, Colonel Jason Guinea, Chief of Staff with the 4th Canadian Division. If you were here 2 years ago, you will remember Jason. Jason was our guest of honor 2 years ago. He had just returned from Ukraine, previous Joint Task Force Ukraine commander. Thank you, Jason, for joining us this evening. Colonel Dan Stepanyuk, Commander 32 Brigade. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Lamy, Commander, Queen's Own Rifles, Canada. Roman Washchuk, Canadian Ambassador to Ukraine. Andriy Veselovsky, Consul General of Ukraine in Toronto. Dr. Oksana Winnicki Yusipovich, Honorary Consul of Canada in Ukraine. Paul Grod is on his way. He's stuck in traffic on, I believe, on the 427, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress National President. He'll be with us in a few minutes. Taras Bahri, Ukrainian Canadian Congress Toronto President. Taras Pidzametsky, Ukrainian National Federation Canada National President. I'm sorry, I must have missed somebody. Oh, that's right, yes. Thank you, Andriy. Andriy Shevchenko, Ukrainian Ambassador to Canada. Actually, that's a mistake. I wasn't going to introduce you because you're going to be talking to us later, correct? That's right. And so is Polkovnik. So you'll be up on the stage a little bit later talking to us. I introduced Taras Bahri, right? Taras Pidzametsky, and Viktor Hitmanchuk from the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. And last but not least, I'd like to acknowledge all the members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have joined us here this evening, especially the members of the Royal Canadian Regiment who've traveled from Petawawa to be with us. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We are all very proud of you and your contributions to international peace and security. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to call upon Ihor Kozak to introduce our special guest this evening, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves. Ihor is well known in the Toronto Ukrainian community. He's a graduate of the Royal Military College of Canada in engineering, and he also holds an MBA. He proudly served in the Royal Canadian Air Force as an aerospace engineer, and since retiring from the Canadian Armed Forces, he's worked as a strategy and management consultant in the North American defense and aerospace sector. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ihor to the podium. I'd also like to mention the fact that Ihor frequently travels to Ukraine, to the front lines of Donbass, and supports Ukrainian troops routinely. Ihor?
Thank you, Zenon. Oh, it's a bit too loud. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Fathers, Your Excellency, General Vinnick, dear friends. It is indeed a pleasure to be here today with all of you on such a special occasion. And it is indeed an honor to be able to introduce to you our keynote speaker and my very close friend, RMC classmate, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves. I can clearly recall how I first met Chris Reeves some 20-odd years ago. It was in the very hot, late summer of 1997 during the recruit term at the Royal Military College of Canada. Now, to put a bit things in a context, for those of you who are not familiar with the recruit term at RMC, after essentially the entire summer of doing drill, crawling in mud, physical training, being eaten by mosquitoes at Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec, during basic officers training, we were sent to RMC for indoctrination training. And at RMC, we were met by the senior cadets who said, "Recruits, your summer holidays are over." And so, during this recruit term, full of panic drills and various other exercises designed to put extreme pressure on the young cadets, at one point in time, when he's not supposed to be talking to me, this kid, I can say kid because I'm a kid myself, approached me and he said, "Як се маєш?" which in a somewhat archaic Western Ukrainian dialect means, "How are you?" And then in the next 10 seconds, before he got caught and got in trouble, Chris told me 4 things. First, his name was Chris Reeves. Secondly, he was from Cape Breton, and he was extremely proud of it. Third, his grandpa was from Ukraine, and he was also extremely proud of it. It turns out, I learned 20 years later, his grandpa was my second-door neighbor, essentially, where I came from. And fourth is that he is going to be a hell of an infantry officer, and he was also very proud of it. Now, Andriy Sukhanivsky here told me that I have 2 minutes to talk. I believe I just wasted 1 minute, so I'll be brief, not to get in trouble with Andriy. I have to follow chain of command here. And so, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to project you 20 years forward. In the summer of 2017, last year, I got a message from Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves that he was about to deploy to Ukraine as a task force commander, Rota 4, Up Unifier. And I also clearly recall, and my wife can witness this, that I sat back in my home and I almost had tears in my eyes. The experience was unreal, almost surreal. We talked at RMC 20 years ago about geopolitics, about Ukraine, about threat of Russian aggression, although the Cold War was over. Over the course of 20 years, we met with Chris at RMC reunions in Ottawa when he was in the senior Stockton College and talked the same topics. And here he is, he was about to deploy to Ukraine when I just came from the front lines of the Donbass. And so I couldn't believe it. That here 20 years later, Chris and I were standing shoulder to shoulder, fighting Russian aggression, fighting for freedom of Ukraine, for security and stability of the free world, and for our Canadians' values. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, this is what Canada all about. This is what Ukrainian-Canadian community is all about. And this is what Canadian Armed Forces all about. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I have 30 seconds, Andriy. Without further ado, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves, who enrolled in the Canadian Armed Forces in 1996 and is a graduate, as I said, of the Royal Military College of Canada with a business administration degree. Serving with both 1st and 3rd Battalions of the Royal Canadian Regiment, Chris is a qualified patrol pathfinder, U.S. Army Ranger, and an advanced reconnaissance patrolman. Before becoming a commanding officer of the 3 RCR, amongst other places, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves was posted to the Canadian Parachute Center in Trenton, Ontario, to Canadian Army Headquarters in Ottawa, and as a 2nd Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group Chief of Staff in Parawawa. He completed numerous domestic and international deployments, including twice to Afghanistan, and most recently, as I said, as a commander of the Task Force Ukraine Growth 4 Up Unifier. Chris and his amazing wife, Wendy, have two beautiful children, Dalia and Amir. And if you, ladies and gentlemen, don't remember anything what I read, just remember four things. His name is Chris Reeves. He's a Great Britain. He's a very proud Ukrainian Canadian, and he is a hell of a soldier. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves.
Thank you. Okay, it's going to be hard to top that. This is why you always get asked to be the MC at all of our weddings. Eeyore, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. We do go way back. I don't remember all of that, but I'm just kidding. I remember it because you keep reminding me about it. Thank you. Your Excellencies and General Winnick and Andre, thank you very much for not just inviting me, but for inviting, more importantly, all the soldiers that we were able to get here from Proto 4. Next slide, please. So, you know, the mission itself has evolved quite a bit, and I'm going to get a little bit into how it evolved. I'm also wanted to say a little bit about my personal experiences, but I think you're going to want to hear more from Corporal Williamson and also from Sergeant Barrett, two soldiers who volunteered to brave this crowd and give some of their own personal experiences. So we're going to get to them in very short few minutes. But as Eeyore said, I didn't really understand my Ukrainian roots. I think I grew up eating a vareniki and maybe had a veshivanka or two, but I did not go to Saturday school. Although Oksana now has demanded I go, so I will. But I would say that my daughters and I celebrated Orthodox Easter by building and baking a beautiful Pascha that I think was better than the ambassadors this year. So it's been really, really special for us as a team to get in touch with our Ukrainian roots, but more importantly, about the mission. So Op Unifier is just one element of what Canada's trying to do, and I think this audience is probably one of the most educated in the country about what we are doing to support a terrific country just across the Atlantic, but on a very, very precipitous location in Europe. I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about the military side. Next slide, please. And he's already been acknowledged, but every day I spent in Ukraine, and we looked back and we said, why do we have so much flexibility in this mission? It's because of Colonel Jay Guinea. He started Roto Zero. He's been recognized, and I'd just like to do it one more time. Jay, thank you very much, sir. Colonel Guinea's ability to foreshadow where the mission might be going gave us a lot of flexibility, and I'm going to get more to that later. You know, it shouldn't be understated that Canada was the first to put her hand up to support Ukraine when she needed help. And a big part of our mission was demonstrating that Ukraine has friends. The United States mission came just after ours in the fall of 2015. And very important to our rotation, ladies and gentlemen, was the renewal of our memo to cabinet, or the renewal of our mandate. And that gave us great flexibility and the ability to look forward and plan well into the future. Next slide, please. All of our missions overseas must be couched in good government policy, and we're lucky now to have strong, secure, and engaged. This defense policy gives us a lot of support, and it is really going to set up the armed forces, your armed forces, for the next 20 years plus. General Winnick knows it probably inside and out. He's going to be fighting it for the next few years. But for us here on the ground, sir, if this document starts to come to fruition, which it already is, we're in really good shape. And all of the young men and women that we have we have a good future in the armed forces. And as we get deployed, we know that Canada has our back based on this document. Thank you. Next, please. Inside this policy, where do we fall in? So people hear that we were going to Ukraine. The first thing they asked me in Cape Breton or in Petawawa was, I didn't know there was a war in Ukraine. Are you going there to fight? And as a soldier, there's a brief moment where I pause for a second. And I do have to say, no, I'm not going to the east to fight. That's a personal thing. But what I've been able to express to our soldiers, and I know now there's no doubt in their mind, going over there to train, mentor, and coach with the Ukrainian Armed Forces was every bit as honorable and admirable. And there was pressures. And we were able to do that because we have good government support for it, and also their families were allowed them to go over there and work in that environment. And so next slide, please. I think before we get into what our personal experiences were, we just want to show a very short video. And as you're watching it, if you could listen to some of the voiceover, look for some of the interactions between Canadian soldiers and Ukrainians, because they will come out in some of our speeches later on. So if you could please play the video.
The non-lethal equipment, which includes winter military uniforms, is planned to be distributed to soldiers fighting against Russian-backed insurgents in the Donbas region. That a third batch of non-lethal aid, which is part of Canada's estimated $11 million aid package, will arrive in Ukraine. One of the Canadian military's top priorities is to help Ukrainian troops reach NATO compatibility by 2020.
Ukrainian soldiers here are some of the most patriotic, technically aware, and dedicated soldiers I've seen throughout my entire career.
Дістав кільце. Показав всім. Пішли далі. Стоп! Поворот!
Next slide, please. You know, the mission, what we were doing over there, as it started in the very beginning, to start with a small group of soldiers and then work outwards into larger bases and move from a tactical scenario where we were doing direct training and working on training institutions and helping the Ukrainians change their approach to training to make them more effective. The way we were able to do all that is we had to start somewhere. So we have to approach the problem from our own Canadian Army training, because that's what we've been asked to do. And so our ability, our enthusiasm, our own resiliency, the respect we bring to the mission allowed us to develop rapport early on. Because although this audience here would imagine that, okay, we're going to send Canadians over to Ukraine, and I know that Colonel Jay would say the same, there was some skepticism on the ground. They were fighting in the east, we were there just to train. What did we know about helping the Ukrainian Armed Forces get better? Yes, you're NATO, but you're not bringing all of your equipment with you. You're not donating a whole lot other than some of the things we did do. So where do you start? So you have to break down a lot of barriers. You have to build a lot of rapport, and that starts with coming at the mission from a position of respect. Next, please. There are many ways you can approach a security force capacity building. And when we were starting in the beginning with an independent approach, so really a side-by-side method, the Canadians were here, and we would give some advice to our Ukrainian partners. We realized that there's certainly other ways we should be doing business. And so before we left, we were both doing this side-by-side method. We also had Canadian officers and soldiers working directly for Ukrainian officers. And that actually took some negotiation and took some convincing. The first time we proposed that to some of our Ukrainian colleagues, they actually said, well, we can't pay your salaries. I said, that's okay. Canada's got you covered. what I need you to do is trust your subordinate, and your subordinate in this case is going to be a Canadian officer. And so at the military academy in Lviv, there's a Canadian deputy commandant. Down at the Odessa Military Academy, there's Canadians, deputies of faculties. And so those Ukrainian officers are in charge of Canadians, and they're working together every day. So that trust that they're building, that I was getting at, that is making them more effective. The third piece is fully integrated. And through the support of our own Canadian Armed Forces, while we were deployed, we brought an extra 48 soldiers from Canada towards the last 3 months of the mission. And that platoon of soldiers from Petawawa, they worked directly for a Ukrainian battalion, which to my knowledge, I don't think has ever been done before. And so by the end of the mission, we had a Ukrainian battalion commander, and under his command was a Canadian platoon, getting orders, asking really tough questions, working through battle procedure together. And when our own regimental colonel visited, we had Canadian troops spilling out of the back of Ukrainian armored vehicles. That was a sight to see in the Avriv training area, and those bonds are still very strong right now. The tasks that we are also focused on, training, advising, mentoring, all of those activities take a lot of work from both sides. And what we needed to remind ourselves often was that while we're there for 6 months, the Ukrainian team is there permanently. In fact, they live there, and they're not rotating out. So we would come in and wanting to work 20-hour days, so did the Ukrainians. But the progress that we needed to understand was long-term. So as we started to understand that our goals needed to be extended out well into the future, it gets back to the point I said about the renewal of the mandate that gives us that flexibility to plan well into the future and then work backwards. Next, please. The missions themselves that we were doing, the types of military capabilities haven't changed a whole lot since Colonel Guinea was there. But what has changed is the level at which we were doing it. So in the beginning with medical, for example, when we were teaching Ukrainian soldiers how to do better medical care on the battlefield, by the end of the rotation, we were working with training medical instructors. We were advising the Surgeon General of Ukraine, and we were helping to build the Ukrainian Medical Academy. So as you can already see, we're trying to elevate the assistance that we're providing. We tried to do that in all of the lines of effort throughout. The last thing I would say, next slide please, is that while we originally started in 2 locations, in Lviv and also in Kamyats-Podilsky, we were able to, through a lot of work and trust building, spread out it into many, many more locations around the country. And while we wanted to go and probably even more, there was something that we started to call fertile ground for change. And the Ukrainian Armed Forces is a big organization, but not everybody in the Ukrainian Armed Forces wanted to change. Now there's a lot of different reasons why they didn't want to change. And so we couldn't just pick these locations off the map. We couldn't just go to the beautiful locations in the south along the Black Sea. We had to go to some pretty tough places, but places where there were Ukrainian officers and soldiers that wanted to work with us and wanted to change. And so when we found those change agents, when we found people in the armed forces that wanted to work with us and give good return on our investment, we put the flag there and we said, we're going to be here for a while. And this is where we ended up around the country. And throughout all of this network, I think we're able to really influence the institution that is the armed forces, from the general staff, from partnering with our own defense attaché in Kyiv, all the way down to the tactical level of schoolhouses and training centers throughout the country. Next slide, please. So again, enough talking from my point of view. Let me call up Sergeant Barrett, and I'd like to introduce Sergeant Barrett as he's walking up here. The team we bring over are very capable, very competent, non-commissioned officers, soldiers, and officers. They bring a lot of experience, but each of them had to figure out how to build rapport and really understand their target audience, as we would say. And so Sergeant Barrett is a sniper in our battalion, and he was tasked with helping to build a sniper program for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So please welcome Sergeant Barrett.
Thank you, sir. General Winnick, ambassadors, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here tonight. My name is Sergeant Gary Barrett. During my deployment to Ukraine, I was employed as a task force master sniper. Under Lieutenant Colonel Reeves's leadership and guidance, we employed snipers to 3 different locations throughout the country. This level of commitment in regards to Canadian snipers in Ukraine has never been done during previous rotations of Op Unifier. Our 3 4-man sniper teams were at bases outside of Lviv and Kyiv. The main effort for training was where my team was, which was 1 hour northeast of Kyiv. The slideshow will tell you a part of our story, but most importantly, it tells a story of Ukrainian sniper instructors, candidates, Canadian snipers, and the bonds we made. As it is playing, I will speak a little bit about the training we conducted and some experience from the 6 months. One of the greatest threats to Ukrainian soldiers on the front line is enemy sniper fire. Well-equipped and well-trained separatists have inflicted multiple casualties on the battlefield, and because of this, the armed forces of Ukraine has been very focused on increasing their sniper capabilities. When the AFU is successful with increasing their capabilities, they will be able to change the face of the battlefield and gain the initiative in regards to sniper operations. A cornerstone to this success is support from foreign nations, which is where we come into play. When we first arrived to the sniper school that we would be working at for the next 6 months, we didn't really know what to expect. Training snipers in Canada is a difficult task on its own, and there we were, 4 Canadians, 8 hours from the rest of our task force, with no knowledge of the language, living near an old Soviet base amongst the locals and responsible for training future snipers. And not just any snipers, but snipers that would either go directly to the front line or become sniper instructors. So I mentioned that training snipers is a hard task. To understand what I mean, I'll briefly tell you about what we do as snipers besides just shooting. To become a highly skilled and successful sniper, the candidate needs to be mature, physically and mentally fit. During training, the candidate has to become an expert and be successful in completing a multitude of tasks. These include shooting, concealment, observation, judging distance, navigation, and stalking. What most people don't usually realize is that it is a combination of all these skills that make a sniper a deadly warrior on the battlefield. Shooting is actually only a small part and not the hardest task during a sniper's training. The hardest part of a sniper's training is stalking. It prepares a sniper to move in and out of a fire position on the battlefield undetected. So if I could just get you to think for a second, picture this for a minute. 2 Ukrainian soldiers pass their sniper training and get sent to the front line. They get tasked by their commander to select and occupy a position of observation where they will have to kill their enemy at long range with rifle fire. The snipers now have to find a position that puts that enemy in the range of their rifle. Move into this position, engage their target, and move out of that position while remaining undetected at all times. The separatists and pro-Russian forces have tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and anti-sniper systems that all use thermal imagery and high-powered day scopes. All this being said, you can really get an idea of how in-depth we have to go with our training when preparing snipers and why it is very difficult to train them. As experienced Canadian snipers, we recognize the importance of giving the Ukrainian soldiers the best training at each location. Throughout the 6 months, we trained roughly 200 Ukrainian soldiers as designated marksmen or to the level of sniper. We wrote over 50 lesson presentations for the Ukrainian sniper schools and built their sniper instructor course, which included a 155-page manual, on how to train snipers. The first sniper instructor course ran in November 2017. 12 candidates were successful. The next course will take place this July. However, the most important thing we built during our time in Ukraine was everlasting bonds and the reputation, our reputation in the Ukrainian sniper community. These relationships were built by all sniper members of the task force, but also by our command team. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves visited the main sniper school roughly once a month, which played a huge role in our relationship building. During the graduation of our sniper instructor course, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves awarded a candidate who was a conscript at the time a CO's coin. This had a huge impact on this soldier. By the next Monday, he decided to sign his contract with the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Max, that's the soldier's name, he personally told me that graduating the course and receiving that award pushed him to sign the contract, as he never felt like he had achieved that much in life before he went to the sniper school. When we weren't training snipers, we built relationships in other places. We joined the local gym and exchanged greetings and handshakes with the locals there. We also frequently visited the local barber, grocery store, and restaurants. Speaking of that, the food in Ukraine is amazing. The architecture and countryside is beautiful. And I really like to drive in Ukraine. It's almost like there's no rules. As long as you say thank you with your four-ways and you watch out for the police officer on the side of the road with the little red paddle, you're good to go. In general, I fell in love with the country, and maybe a few Ukrainian women as well. But none of that love compares to the friendships we made at the sniper school. We were truly a part of their brotherhood. We were comrades. We attended birthday parties, bonded in the sauna cabin, and exchanged stories and gifts. I personally believe that Ukrainians have a deeper sense of relationships than we do here in Canada. And I still speak with many of the Ukrainians we worked with to this day. I'm very proud of the men I worked with, both Canadian and Ukrainian, and I'm very thankful that I got to lead such an amazing bunch of Canadian snipers. I'm confident that our hard work and our accomplishments in Ukraine will have a direct impact on the front line and will serve as a foundation for the Ukrainian sniper program going forward. I plan on traveling back to Ukraine and hopefully work with their snipers again. If that trip doesn't happen with the military, I will travel there as a civilian. Going back is a must because Ukraine has such a bright future, and I left some pieces of my heart and my soul at the sniper school. Дякую. Слава Україні.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Barrett, for volunteering or being voluntold to provide that speech. Sergeant Barrett really did leave it all out on the field out in Ukraine, but he wasn't the only member of that task force. I'd like to call up Corporal Williamson, a combat engineer by trade, a female soldier, and a really great warrior. Corporal Williamson also volunteered to provide some of her personal experiences.
Thank you very much, sir. Доброго вечір. Good evening, General Winnick, sir, ambassadors, members of parliament, and fellow brothers and sisters of arms. My name is Corporal Barbara Williamson. I am a combat engineer with 2CR in Petawawa, Ontario. For those of you who don't know what a combat engineer is, our primary role in combat is to provide Allied force mobility on the battlefield and to counter the mobility of the enemy. The easiest way to describe our job is we build bridges, and we blow stuff up. But that's just the start. Our skill set encompasses such a wide variety of capabilities that, quite frankly, I don't think engineers even know what we actually do most of the time. We're a jack of all trades and a master of none. We have been brought together this evening in order to recognize the commitment Canadian soldiers have shown in our ongoing mission in Ukraine. It's not a typical mission. The role of Canadians participating in Unifier has been defined and redefined countless times. It is an ever-evolving beast. I can honestly say that I deployed unsure of the exact role that I would be playing for the 6 months abroad, and many others were plagued with the same uncertainty. That being said, our flexibility as Canadian soldiers made us capable of reacting on the fly, so we were able to accommodate the demands placed upon us with minimal difficulty and a below average amount of griping. If I could define the mission in my own words, it would be to provide support and assist in improving the newly developed training plan. The official verbatim describing our role was mentor the mentors. Our job was to stand back, observe, and provide assistance when asked. And also, we were to provide feedback to the Ukrainian instructors after each tasking was complete. Sounds pretty simple, right? Sometimes it was. There were times when you had to stand back and watch everything go crashing down in a training scenario. Preventable failures occurred, tempers flared, and swords were drawn. Based on my job description, I had to sit back and keep my mouth shut unless I was asked for advice. For those of you that know me, it was not a request taken lightly. It took quite a while to get into the groove of being a mentor and not a teacher. I'm not going to lie, it was frustrating at times. The pre-Soviet tactics were still extremely prevalent. Stubbornness and fear of the new would intervene, and a few times it was a tug of war before the middle ground was met. But then, there was the other side of things. The side where you provide guidance and observe it being utilized. You watch it in action, you see the troops come together, and you see all the light bulbs go off. That moment, that second, that is one of the most glorious feelings in the world. When I accepted this mission, I had one goal. I said to myself, you only need to get through to one person. If you can get through to one person and assist them in developing the skills that they need to stay alive, then you have accomplished your mission. There it was. My personal mission. I accomplished my mission during the 5th of our 6-month deployment. I was working with our American brethren, and I was able to give a lecture/demonstration on wire obstacle breaching in a high-threat environment to the Ukrainian army. The troop commander was a young lieutenant. He had a stern face, he never smiled, and I swear he was young enough to be my son. He observed, he listened, and by the end of the day, his entire troop was seamlessly breaching and moving. And it was, I'm sorry, but there's no other way to describe it, but pure awesomeness. He got it. They got it. God forbid they ever had to employ the skills that I was teaching them, but if they ever did, I knew that they would be effective. That was by far the best reward I could have asked for. There are many perks involved with deploying: the tax-free pay, the medals, the allowances, but for me, nothing, absolutely nothing can replace the feeling of pride when those you're mentoring get it, use it, and effectively employ it. Ukrainians are proud people. I was slightly envious of their dedication to their country, traditions, and heritage. The honor that is portrayed by Ukrainians is one that has been lost in so many other cultures in the past decades. Every single person I met had an air about them. They were proud, they were strong, and they were dedicated to their country. Throughout history, Ukraine has been the equivalent of an only child stuck in the middle of a venomous custody battle. Though the boundaries have changed, the patriotism has not. When you witness this among the troops, it's something to be admired. The hardships they endure, it makes you really think and appreciate the small perks our military provides. For example, during a single charge demolition range, we observed an instructor maneuvering around the individual training bays with speed, grace, and a lighter. The wind was so strong the troops weren't able to ignite their time fuse with the plain, ordinary wooden matches that they were using. A simple piece of kit like a match fusee or M60 igniter means that we, as Canadians, should never have to encounter that issue. In an obstacle breach, when you're under contact, setting off that charge quickly could be the difference between life and death. This is just one example of many. The men and women fighting for Ukraine are placing their country above all, and the soldiers give up a lot more than that of their international brothers and sisters in arms. Throughout it all, they remain unfazed, and nothing beats the big smiles, the jokes, the chirps, which are way funnier when you have a linguist translating them for you, by the way. These are little things that bridge the culture gap. They bring you together, and most importantly, it makes you feel at home. Unifier has managed to extend past the gates of the training centers. As Canadians, we recognize the importance of supporting a country as a whole and not just the soldiers fighting in the war. Roto 4 managed to open its arms to various community outreach programs. Our Padre was keen on leading change through supporting local orphanages and women's shelters across Ukraine. The majority of the support we were providing was in the general vicinity of Lviv, but there was an abundance of opportunity to expand on our area of operations in the future. We paid tribute to International Women's Day by visiting a local shelter for families in need. There we went and met with over a dozen women, each with their own unique story, and each struggling to keep afloat due to a wide variety of circumstances. From a single mother suffering from cancer and able to finance treatment, to a woman with 5 children whose husband is fighting in the war while she stays at home to run the farm and provide extensive care to her severely disabled daughter. The pain these women endured was heart-wrenching, yet they held their heads high, they smiled, and they were determined to persevere. That day was very special to me. I cried, I laughed, and I got invited to come back to Ukraine to shovel horse manure. These programs are important and should be given the opportunity to expand. As members of the Canadian Armed Forces, we all know that family comes first, and when your head is at home, then your body shouldn't be in the fight. If we support the people will support us. That's half the battle won. My experience in Ukraine was filled with countless ups and few downs. Some days you would feel defeated and wonder, what are we doing here? As you beat your head off the wall, wondering if your job description could be found in the dictionary as the definition of insanity. It's all about respecting the learning curve, though, and both sides have to learn from their mistakes in order to grow. Our efforts are not in vain. Little by little, we have watched the Ukrainian army expand on their capabilities and become more versatile. From my perspective, it was an eye-opening and fulfilling experience, and I'm sure the other veterans of Unifier feel the same. Thank you for allowing me to share my experiences with you. I'll now turn the floor back to Lieutenant Colonel Chris Reeves. Good night. Дякую. До побачення. Слава Україні!
I do hope you believe me that those are just two of well over 200 individual stories that are all just, I would say, equally as powerful. Corporal Williamson, thank you again for volunteering. You know, one of the things we learned quickly in Ukraine is that even though we were doing great work, very proud of what our soldiers were doing, if people didn't see it, if they didn't hear about it, it's almost as if it didn't happen. And I know Corporal Williamson said, you know, getting through to one soldier, that was a personal mission of hers, and she got through to way more than that. We really had to engage in the information space. And if you think social media is pretty popular here in Canada, well, in Ukraine, 160,000 followers, sir, the Ukrainian ambassador, ran a revolution on social media. That is, you know, a huge eye-opener for us. And so we tried to embrace it, and we did. We got a lot of what we were doing out into the space, into the information space. And before I go to the next slide, let me thank the Ukrainian Canadian community here in Canada for following us and being most of our Twitter followers. Next slide, please. Corporal Williamson and Sergeant Barrett both talked about outreach, but we were given the flexibility early on to get off the camp, use some of our funds months that were directed for training and call outreach part of core business, because it really truly was a big part of what we were doing. And it's not because we were over there to deliver blankets or humanitarian assistance. It was all about how do we build understanding and trust and increase respect between the two nations. So all of the soldiers had at least 2 or 3 hats that they wore. You heard about the pastor. He was my chaplain for the task force, our chaplain. He was there to mentor the Ukrainian chaplain branch, and then he ran a big part of our outreach program. In the top left-hand corner, Master Corporal David was our chief cook, but she also taught cooking classes to a group home when she had some time off on Sundays. Throughout the slides, and this is just a small example, a lot of our troops were able to build those linkages with the Ukrainian community and bring more to the mission. Because to understand your student or your partner is probably the most important thing in the job we were doing. Next slide, please. So just in summary, an incredibly powerful experience for all of us. Very grateful for the opportunity to go and do it. And we also brought a lot back. All of us are now better soldiers. We're better Canadians. And I think we're just better people. So thank you very much.
We have the lights turned up, please. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves has kindly offered to take a few questions from the audience. I would ask that if you do have a question, you identify yourself and clearly ask a brief question using the microphone. Can we get a microphone out to the audience? Got it here?
Hello, I'm from Ukraine.
Doblevych.
I just came from there. I'm a Ukrainian warrior. I've never been to UWVA, and I've never met you there. It's a pity. I don't mind. Well, but I served in Ukraine for, I guess, from the very start in different brigades and sniper teams also. Special operations and all that stuff. And I wanted to ask, don't you think that you're using Ukraine? Because I guess you learned from this experience more. And I don't mean that that's bad, that's great. I hope you do more, because as for me, a combat participant, constant participant, I guess you can do more. Thank you.
Maybe if I could just add to that. So I know Canadian Armed Forces have been since I guess 2015, and I know there's a discussion around the learnings that take place, and we know that, for example, there are Canadian troops stationed in Latvia, and I was just wondering, in terms of some of the learnings that we were able to garner from the Ukrainian soldiers taking the training or through the different sort of training locations that the Canadian troops have gone to Ukraine. Can you maybe talk about some of the things, tangible things that have been learned that are actually applied, in Latvia? I know the Canadian troops just completed an exercise some 300 kilometers from the border with Russia. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of those types of learnings, for example?
I think we can.
Thank you.
I don't speak for all of the task force, because a lot of the lessons we were learning were often at the individual level. But the idea that you still have to find a way to maneuver in a oversaturated electronic warfare threat and balance your technology with, as you know, what some parts of the trench warfare is almost reminiscent of World War I. And so while in the Canadian Armed Forces, while we do understand where we came from and where our lessons have come from, we have a tendency to, we build on our past, but we are always looking forward, and we do go to technology first. And I mean, that's my personal opinion. I find we want to rely on technology. We want to rely on modern weaponry. We feel like we need to be able to connect by data and computers to all of us. And yet the Ukrainians are working in a situation where they're employing both high technology solutions like their own purpose-built drones. They're employing their own applications on tablet software, on tablet devices that they have built themselves, at the same time that they're living in a dugout 5 meters below the ground, eating bread and borscht and, you know, transporting some of their wounded in taxis. So, you know, the ability for Ukrainian soldiers to be able to manage that full spectrum from very, very old tactics, techniques, and procedures to high technology, we learned, I think, a little bit about how we can reach back into some of our early lessons and apply them. And now I haven't served in Latvia, so I can't say that what they're doing in the Latvia theater applies that way, but I know for ourselves, we're bringing it back. And the big message is, don't forget about the basics, because we need those. You saw the very first video with soldiers digging in by shovel. I haven't carried a shovel on my rucksack in years. And it's something that's a very small device that I do now know where my, what's called an E-tool, excavation tool is. And so we're getting back into understanding how defensive works are set up. Corporal Williamson was talking about combat engineering. So it's a bit of a rambling answer, but there are so many little tangible lessons that we're bringing back and forth that I could speak about here openly. And the list goes on and on. So tonight, I welcome you to grab the troops before they leave and just ask them their personal experience on that. Thank you.
One more question we could take. Any other questions? Right here.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for your support. And my name is Viktor Solvyov, and I also involved in support for the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine as the international expert. I help Norwegian Center for Integrity in the Defense Sphere to improve HRM, Human Resource Management System in Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So my question is, what's the most difficult in your mission? Could you just describe it in 1 or 2 sentences? Thank you.
No. Sorry. Thank you very much for your question. So the challenge of our task force was to identify problems that we could change. And it's not that we were ignoring the problems that we couldn't change, but we had to figure out. So one of the things we were trying to do was, on the request of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, help build up what we call a non-commissioned officer corps. And we were working hard to train and develop training for non-commissioned officers. But at the same time, non-commissioned officers weren't given the access to housing that they needed to bring them and their families to the bases, to the training areas, or even to some of the operational units. And so housing is completely outside of the role of my mission, but we would identify that would come up. Another area would be a bit of reverse incentives. You know, the international community is very quick to give Ukraine a lot of advice. And that advice is couched from our own experience. And we say, you know what you should do is apply this solution because it works in Sweden, or apply this solution, it works in Canada. And Ukraine translates some of it they apply word for word, some of it they try to apply to the situation. But then there is some reverse incentives that get caught up. And for example, when a soldier leaves the front, like we do, his pay and allowances goes down. And then it's actually financially a little bit more incentivized for him or her to break service with the armed forces so that his pension is based on the higher level of pay. Those things are not anywhere inside our control or even our influence as the task force, but we were able to pull those pieces of information and pass them up through our defense attaché, and I know they were talked about in Kyiv often, and through other organizations like the Defense Reform Advisory Board, which Canada is a part of, we would feed that into. So the biggest challenge for us was understanding that the problem that Ukraine presented itself, which was to go towards NATO, is an elephant. And the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves. At this point in time, I'd like to invite Andriy Sokhnivsky back to the podium for several presentations to Lieutenant Colonel Reeves and to our guest of honor, Lieutenant General Winnick.
This evening, you've been presented with an update on Operation Unifier. You've heard how the mission has evolved from professional development, modernization, and mentoring of Ukraine's military to now supporting Ukraine as it looks west towards military compatibility with NATO. Unifier is also providing the Canadian Army with a unique and immense learning opportunity for this new type of hybrid warfare and faces new threats from Russia. Bear in mind that Canadian soldiers are currently deployed, as I mentioned earlier, in Latvia, some 300 kilometers from the border with Russia. And Canada itself has Russia as its neighbor in the far north. Not a day goes by when the Minsk agreement is violated and a Ukrainian soldier is killed or wounded. In fact, recently there has been an increase in attacks on Ukrainian defensive positions. And unfortunately, there is no end in sight for this conflict. Russia continues to be the most significant threat not only to Ukraine, but to the international order. We encourage the Government of Canada to continue to support this mission beyond 2019, when the mission is currently set to expire, so that the Ukrainian military can continue to transform itself into a modern and strong force that can exert control over its own territory. If I could now ask Lieutenant Colonel Reeves to please come to the stage. On behalf of the Ukrainian War Veterans Association of Canada, I would like to thank you for your presentation and your team's presentation in Operation Unifier this evening. You and your troops under your command have had an immensely positive impact on security in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. You have helped make the Ukrainian army better and stronger. You have exemplified Canada as a leader in military affairs in the region and a partner that can be counted on. On behalf of the Ukrainian War Veterans Association of Canada, I would like to present to you, as leader of the mission, a certificate of appreciation and a plaque recognizing the contribution of the Canadian Armed Forces, and in particular, your troops here today from Petawawa, from the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, and the 2nd Combat Engineering Regiment. We wish you continued success in your military endeavors, in your military careers. You are always welcome here. Slava Kanadi, Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Pro Patria. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we are also here to honor the contributions and achievements of a great Ukrainian Canadian, Lieutenant General Paul Winnik. Lieutenant General Winnik is the first Ukrainian Canadian to command the Canadian Army and soon to be the first to become the Vice Chief of Defense Staff, the second most senior military officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. The Ukrainian War Veterans Association's Knight's Cross is a medal presented to those who have made outstanding military contributions to Canada and to Ukraine. And we are very pleased to be presenting this award to Lieutenant General Winnik this evening. Before doing so, I would like to share with you some highlights of Lieutenant General Winnik's background and career. It is a fascinating and uniquely Canadian story. The Winnik family traces its roots to Halachina, Ukraine, not too far from the Ivoriv training area in Ukraine, where the bulk of the Canadian troops are currently stationed. Enticed by the offer of 160 acres of land for $10, a story you probably have heard many times before, his great-grandfather immigrated to Canada in 1903 and settled in Alberta. His great-grandmother passed away still in Ukraine shortly after giving birth to his grandfather. The religious and military connection was strong in the Winnik family. His great-uncle was Father Michael Palach, the first Ukrainian Catholic priest to be educated entirely in Canada. In 1942, Father Palach became the first Ukrainian Canadian Catholic priest to serve in the Canadian chaplain service of the Canadian Army, serving the spiritual needs of thousands of Ukrainian Canadian military members. Both his uncle and father volunteered for military service in World War II. His uncle served in the RCAF as a wireless air gunner on Lancasters in Bomber Command, and unfortunately was killed returning from a bombing mission over Germany in 1944. His father, Walter, served as a signaller in the Canadian Army and saw action in the Italian campaign. Upon return from the war, Lieutenant General Winnik's father became a school principal and commanding officer of the local Army Cadet Corps. You can imagine what's next. Residing in a small community, Lieutenant General Winnik had little choice but to attend his father's school, and guess what? Be a cadet in his father's unit. There was very little that he could get away with at that time. Upon graduation from high school, Lieutenant General Winnik joined the Canadian Armed Forces. He studied at both the Royal Roads Military College in Victoria, British Columbia, and at the Royal Military College in Kingston, and graduated in 1986 with a degree in engineering. I should mention that in 1986, I had just completed my first year as an officer cadet at Royal Roads, and probably some of your classmates in 3 Squadron would have been my superiors there. Now, General, I did a bit of checking on the internet, and I was able to see that while at Royal Roads, I found the archives of the log. At Royal Roads, you were part of an elite unit known as the LaSalle Animals. and that you earned awards for your outstanding academic and military achievements. It was clear to many at that point that you were destined for greater things. Upon graduation, Lieutenant General Winnik was commissioned in the Royal Canadian Engineers and subsequently took on regimental duties. His command appointments include 1 Combat Engineering Regiment and the forerunner of the 3rd Canadian Division. He became the commander of the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command during the crucial early years of the war in Ukraine in 2014 to 2016. And I suspect, I don't know this to be true, that you were in a very unique position early in the war to see how the conflict was evolving in Ukraine and Russia, and perhaps played a role in whether it was provisioning satellite imagery for the Ukrainian Army, I don't know, but I know the Canadian government at that point did make some of that stuff available. Lieutenant General's overseas assignments included tours with the United Nations in Cambodia and Congo, and with operations in Afghanistan. In 2016, he was appointed the commander of the Canadian Army. And in November of that year, while visiting Canadian troops in Ivoriv, Ukraine, he had the opportunity to reconnect with his family roots in Ukraine. Apparently, this was a complete surprise when Lieutenant General Winnik arrived on that trip to Ukraine. The Ukrainian ambassador to Canada, Andriy Shevchenko, who is here with us today, and the Ukrainian Army commander and Canada's ambassador to Ukraine, Roman Vashchuk, who is also here, and many of you know had clandestinely arranged for Lieutenant General Winnick to visit Podmizir and Radvanci, the ancestral home of the Winnick family, in the middle of a snowstorm, with the way it was explained to me, with every snowplow in Lviv clearing the path so that you could visit. And perhaps we can verify the story later on. It's all true. Okay, good. Lieutenant General Winnick has made numerous subsequent trips to Ukraine and Eastern Europe, in all weather conditions, I might add, visiting Canadian troops and meeting with Ukrainian and other European military commanders. In August 2017, I and some of you here this evening had the honor of attending the official opening of the Battle of Hill 70 Memorial and the Carnival Walk in France. Lieutenant General Winnick was one of the key speakers at the event, at the opening. This was a very important and long overdue memorial to honor a significant Canadian military milestone. This summer, Lieutenant General Winnick will be taking on a new appointment as the Vice Chief of Defense Staff, as I mentioned before, the second highest position in the Canadian military. I would now like to call on Lieutenant General Winnick to please step forward on the stage. I would also like to call on Taras Pizzametsky, President of the Ukrainian National Federation, of which the Ukrainian War Veterans Association is a part of, to also come forward to the stage to help present this award along with me. Sir, as evidenced by today's presentation, the Canadian Army's Unifier mission is making a positive impact on Ukraine's military against a powerful foe, fighting against a powerful foe. This contribution would not be possible without such a highly trained army and without the strong leadership that you have provided. On behalf of the Ukrainian War Veterans Association of Canada, I present to you the Knight's Cross, and I'll show it to you momentarily, with the following citation: for your dedicated service to and the leadership of the Canadian Armed Forces, your support to Operation Unifier, and your honoring of Canadian military history at home and abroad. Slava Канаді, слава Україні, героям слава.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Shevchenko, Ambassador Voshchuk, members of Parliament, Mr. Bazan, Mr. Maloney, Mr. Wisniewski, member of the Provincial Parliament, Mr. Baker, Reverend Fathers, members of the clergy, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Ukrainian War Veterans Association, my great colleagues from the Canadian Army, delighted to have you all here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am truly humbled and honored, and I accept this with great humility on behalf of all Ukrainian Canadians who have served in uniform
and the great Canadian soldiers we have today who have served in Ukraine. What a humbling award. And I should mention Paul Grod. Great to see you. I think many of you are aware of the rich history of service of Ukrainian Canadians in uniform. As was mentioned, last summer, I've been very fortunate as Army Commander because we've celebrated a lot of historical milestones in the Canadian Army. The Battle of Vimy Ridge, obviously. But last year, I had the great honor of going to the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Dieppe and then on to Hill 70. But the Army Sergeant Major and I walked the Dieppe Cemetery. There's close to 1,000 brave Canadian soldiers who are buried there. And it was very interesting. Even the Army Sergeant Major, he's a French Canadian descent, he said, why do so many Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada, a Winnipeg regiment, who fell at Dieppe have Ukrainian names? And I explained to him, and it was just very evident. You could see how that first wave of immigration had already signed up, and so many had given their lives to Canada. And then, of course, as mentioned earlier, 4 or 5 days later, we went on to the dedication of the Hill 70 Memorial. Arguably, I would say a more important battle than the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and I think most historians will say that. Very meaningful for me. My grandfather fought in that battle. My wife's grandfather fought in that battle. But equally important, I got to participate in the dedication of the Philip Conwell Walkway. Many of you were there, and I look back on that as one of sort of the great days in my life and one of the great things that I got to do as an Army Commander. And once again, it just underscored for me the tremendous service and dedication of Ukrainian Canadians in both world wars. And even today, we had our headquarters barbecue in the Army headquarters in Ottawa. So at the end of the year, we get everybody together. And I was sitting down talking to some of our soldiers. I move around, our officers, and I was saying, what are you doing on the weekend? And small talk. And they said, what are you doing on the weekend? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to Toronto. I'm telling them what I was doing. And the number of people around the table said, well, I have Ukrainian blood in me. I have Ukrainian blood. It's just quite amazing how many of us in uniform have some link to Ukraine. So I'm immensely proud of that history of service of Ukrainian Canadians. The Army Sergeant Major and I had the great privilege about a month ago of visiting our troops both in Latvia and Ukraine. With every rotation we go over and then see them. I had once again the great honor to visit Chris and his outstanding soldiers when they were there. It's now a unit based predominantly on the Royal Canadian Dragoons from Petawawa. So we started in Latvia first, and just to underscore what all of our members of Parliament have mentioned, Canada is punching above its weight. We have about 450 soldiers in Latvia. They're part of the enhanced forward presence, deterring Russian aggression, preventing Russian aggression. And I can assure you that the contribution that your Canadian soldiers are making is extraordinary. And we're getting rave reviews, great feedback from Latvia, and they're just doing tremendous work there. We spent a couple days there, and then we went down to Ukraine, to the Everett training area to visit the Royal Canadian Dragoons, and Fraser Auld there, the commanding officer, once again doing extraordinary work. And I think sort of to me, the metaphor for the type of work they're doing, they're working at all sorts of levels, as Chris briefed you, building on the great work that he and his team did over there. But I really tried to seek out some junior officers in the Ukrainian army and some NCOs who had actually been fighting in the East, in what used to be referred to as the ATO, to try and get some feedback on the training they were getting. And without fail, every one of them said, the training that the Canadians are providing Ukrainians is saving lives, and it's saving a lot of lives over there. So I think that's a real testament to what is going on there. And to follow on from one of the comments that was made earlier, our soldiers are learning a lot. They're learning a lot about Russian tactics, and procedures that we're actually applying in how we do operations in Latvia and in how we train here in Canada. Just a week ago, I was in Wainwright. We were doing our sort of final certification exercise for our next group of soldiers that we're deployed. And the type of training that we're doing is very much geared towards a Russian threat. And we're doing a lot of things that I trained to do 25 or 30 years, actually digging in, knowing how to protect yourself from mass artillery. And this is a direct result from the lessons that we are learning from those great Ukrainian soldiers who are actually on the front line every day. I'm extremely, extremely proud of the soldiers we have in the Canadian Army today. And, you know, we've got a great group here from 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, and 2 Combat Engineer Regiment. The strength and the backbone of the Canadian Army are our NCOs, and I think you had just a taste tonight of 2 extraordinary NCOs who gave a briefing here. And I'm actually a little intimidated to stand up and talk to you as their Army commander after such great presentations. So I'd ask you once again to just join me in a round of applause for the great soldiers who make up the Canadian Army. I've been on a lot of missions over my career, and I can tell you the mission in Ukraine is one of the best. Latvia is doing very well as well. I mentioned we've got terrific soldiers, we've got great leaders, we do very good training, but really a mission like this takes sort of an international or a whole of government approach. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Shevchenko for the terrific support and the attention that you are paying to this mission here in Canada, the fact that you visit our soldiers before they go, you encourage them, you never miss an opportunity to turn up at an event or an occasion that honors our soldiers. That's noticed, and we're extremely grateful. So thank you so much. I'd also like to publicly acknowledge our ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Roman Vaschuk, ably assisted by Oksana in the West. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Once again, I've been on a lot of missions. I've never seen such great support at the diplomatic level. Once again, you are involved 100%. Anytime I go over, you go out of your way to brief us, bring up to speed. Ladies and gentlemen, he's too humble, but he is the Dean of Ambassadors in Kyiv. He is the #1 ambassador. Yeah. And I'm just immensely proud that the #1 ambassador is Canadian. And Roman, thank you so much for your personal support of our soldiers. I hear it time and time again how much effort you put into visiting our soldiers and looking after them. And I'm immensely grateful. And the last point I want to mention is to the Ukrainian Canadian community writ large in Canada. I think there's, 1.3 million of us? 1.4. Well, I think there's more based on talking to Army headquarters today. But you know, once again, you know, when you look at that ethnic diaspora here in Canada and the support to this mission, it means a lot. I know Chris will say that. I know we've got Jason Guinea here. He'll say that as well. And you know, Chris, as was mentioned, Reeves doesn't sound like a Ukrainian name, but he's got Ukrainian blood in him as well. So thank you so much, and thank you for all of you for supporting our mission. Ladies. Oh, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm almost done, but you know, when I reflect back on my career, as was mentioned, my very first posting in the Army was facing off against a Soviet threat, a menace that was coming out of Moscow. And you know, I often reflect now, my very last posting in the Canadian Army as the Army Commander is facing off against a menace from Moscow. And most of my effort over the last 2 years has been countering and preparing our troops to deter the Russian threat. I wouldn't say that I'm proud to do that, but I kind of am as a Ukrainian Canadian. And I just wonder how you get on that Russian persona non grata list, because that's one honor I want. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for once again this award. But once again, this is an award that you've made to the entire Canadian Army. Thank you so much for honoring our great Canadian soldiers, and thank you so much for supporting this very special relationship that we have between Canada and Ukraine that goes all the way back to that first wave of immigration before 1900. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Ambassador Andriy Shevchenko to come forward and offer a few words on behalf of the government of Ukraine.
What a night. And what can I add? And I was listening to General Winnick, and I have a confession to make. I am one of those miserable Ukrainians in Ottawa who missed his presentation on his Ukrainian family roots. A couple of months ago, such an event was in Ottawa. So now I understand what I missed, and you understand what you missed. I'm afraid next time when you're going to do this, it's going to be like Canadian Tire Center full of people and with tickets as expensive as Maple Leaf tickets here in Toronto. We are here to celebrate camaraderie. And the first time I heard this word about Ukraine and Canada when 2 years ago, together with Ambassador Washchuk, we had the pleasure to accompany Prime Minister Trudeau and General Vance into Yavoriv. Of course, I was very thrilled to hear from Canadian officers and soldiers their stories and their lessons they had learned from Ukrainians. But I think I was even more thrilled to see the relations between the Ukrainians and the Canadians. This mutual respect, appreciation, very faithful friendship. I think it was absolutely amazing. Later on, I thought about this camaraderie when I watched Canadian soldiers marching down the streets of Khreshchatyk on the Independence Day parade on August the 24th last year. And when they marched down the main street of Kyiv along with the Ukrainian soldiers and along with our NATO friends, I thought what a powerful signal of support that was, and what a powerful signal of deterrence towards Russia that was. And of course I thought about camaraderie when here we hosted the Ukrainian Invictus team in September last year. Of course it was the wonderful Toronto Ukrainian-Canadian community which made the Ukrainian team feel like they were home. But I also know that those men and women who left their uniforms in Ukraine and who brought here their sport athletes uniforms to participate in the games, they were coming here and they felt like home because they knew they were coming to their friends. And this is a very valuable feeling which we have between our two nations and between our men and women in uniforms. I think it's also amazing that Operation Unifier gave many Canadians a chance to discover Ukraine. And that, of course, includes some Ukrainian Canadians, and I think Unifier has provided a wonderful, legitimate opportunity for General Winnick to go to Radvancy and to trace his roots. And a couple of weeks ago, we had the pleasure to host Colonel Reeves in our embassy, and he told me about his story, about him visiting Khvorostkiv in the Ternopil Oblast, and how he had his grandfather on the phone trying to figure exactly where his family, what street and what house his family was coming from. I think it's absolutely amazing and extraordinary. And aside of this camaraderie theme, I can just say that on behalf of Ukraine, I would like to greatly thank the Canadian Armed Forces for Operation Unifier. And I would like to thank Canada for supporting Ukraine in so many ways. With your medical missions, with your political support, whether it's the sanctions or whether it's the Magnitsky Law, with all your phone calls and letters, and with all your prayers and the proper words which you always have for your Ukrainian friends, for Ukrainian brothers and sisters. We often say that in the end of all, we remember not the words of our enemies, but silence of our friends. Canada has never been silent about Ukraine. We have always felt your support. Thank you so much for this. Starting from Philippe Conoval, there is a very long tradition of Canadian men and women in uniforms who make the choice to go overseas where peace and justice are threatened. And I would like to thank Canada and many people present in this room for wonderful continuation of this tradition. When I visited Petrovava for the last time, and the last rotation was about to leave for Ukraine, there was an amazing feeling in that room when you looked at the faces of friends and family members, how much pride they had in their relatives, their friends who were about to go abroad. They knew that their friends, relatives were going for a very right, very noble cause, and there was so much pride in that. I think it's an amazing feeling. Finally, I think for Canada, it's not just morally right to be with us in this fight. I think it's also pragmatically smart. For many decades, Canada has benefited from the international order based on law, based on respect between different countries, and we should not let such a world to collapse because of attacks of some crazy, insane dictators. So I'm absolutely sure that this is the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do, and we are so grateful for this. Thank you for standing with us in defense of the free world. Thank you for showing such a strong example to everyone around the globe. Thank you for being very passionate, very noble, very faithful friends to us. And the day will come when we will thank each other for the victory that we have achieved together. Glory to Canada. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. Our program is drawing to a close very shortly. I would now like to invite Colonel Viktor Syrymoka, Defense Attaché from Ukraine, to say a few words.
Basile is like this. Your Excellencies, Member Parliament, пане Андрію, шановна громада, пані та панове. My name is Colonel Viktor Syrymoka. I'm Ukraine's defense attaché here in Canada since October 2016. I'm honored to represent here Ministry of Defense, General Staff, and of course our men and women in uniform. At the same time, it's a big challenge for me because we still have war in our country, в нашій Україні. People are still dying every single day. Just this May, they lost 17 our soldiers. Just imagine, 17 fathers, sons, husbands, 17 men. OSCE confirms 10 civilians killed only in May, only in Donbass. Just a couple of days ago, a very young and promising girl had been killed in Trident area. That was shelling from occupied territory. She had just celebrated her 15th birthday just 3 days before her terrible death. So that's why today we're still forced to keep searching for response to Russian aggression. Because the aim of Russian aggression is to destroy democracy, liberal freedoms, and, of course, human rights, and not only in Ukraine. Has something changed over the last 4 years since the war began? Yes, it has. The international coalition in support of Ukraine and the rule of international law has only strengthened. I'm very pleased to stress that Canada has been one of our main partners who supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Canada and Ukraine continue to work together on military training and defense matters. In April last year, Canada and Ukraine has signed a very important document, Defense Cooperation Arrangement, in order to show international cooperation and to show Canada's steadfast commitment to our country, to Ukraine. The addition of Ukraine to automatic firearms country control list, announced by Minister Chrystia Freeland, God bless this woman, has become a strong signal to Russia that Canada will continue to stand with people of Ukraine. Through Operation Unifier, the Canadian Armed Forces have trained more than 7,400 Ukrainian soldiers as of May 2018. Last year, for the first time, a unit of 30 Canadian soldiers marched on the Ukrainian Independence Day parade. And this year, I hope to see our brothers in arms on August 24 in Kyiv again. Ukraine highly appreciates political support and essential practical assistance that people of Canada provide to Ukrainian armed forces. I would like to thank the Honourable Minister Sejan, Chief of Defence General Vance, Canadian Army Commander Lieutenant General Vinnick, and all commanders, Colonel Chris Reeves, Tim Arsenault, Jason Guinea, and current Joint Task Force Commander Fraser Auld, for their involvement in all these activities and matters. The people of Ukraine will always remember the hand of support extended to us by our friends in the most difficult moment of our history. Thank you for your attention and confidence to our country. Glory to Canada, та слава Україні!
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite you all to stand and join in the singing of the Canadian and the Ukrainian national anthems.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all our sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true rock strong and free.
In closing tonight's event, I would like to thank our organizing committee, our volunteers, the Kalina Dance Group, all of our military guests, and especially our troops from Petawawa. I would also like to thank all of you for coming out this evening to show your support for the Canadian Armed Forces and their very important hard work in support of Ukraine. We will be having some group photos at the end here, so I'd ask that all military personnel and veterans gather for some photos. Thank you very much and have a good evening.